On today's show, I talk with Tyler York about scrappy creativity and why we always need to be aware of our biggest opportunity cost. I'm Julie B., and they don't teach this in business school. Hey there, I'm Julie B., and you're listening to They Don't Teach This in Business School, a podcast where we discuss business ownership lessons that are learned through experience, not in a classroom or seminar. Today, I'm welcoming Tyler York, the co-founder of Achievable, to the show, and I'm really looking forward to the conversation we're going to have today because I know we'll learn some valuable business lessons. Tyler, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Great. So, Tyler, why don't you just give us an overview of Achievable and your role in the business and just some background into what you all provide and do?
Yeah, so Achievable is a modern test prep platform for what are basically the most important and high stakes exams of people's lives, right? So these are the tests that you need to score well on or pass in order to get to the next step in your career, whether that's, college, graduate school, or getting licensed for a job. And the way we do that, we call ourselves a digital personal trainer. And what does a personal trainer do? They have a plan so that when you show up, all you have to do is be there, and then the plan's taken care of for you. They keep you motivated and engaged throughout the process, and they let you know how ready you are to reach your goal. And personalize the journey along the way using our adaptive learning algorithm to help you reach your maximum score. So that's just like kind of a high level overview.
Yeah, yeah. And I think just so our audience knows, because I know I know you provide some training for example, we have financial advisors and insurance agents that listen, so it might be helpful for them to
Right.
know like a little bit about some of those specific industries you serve.
Yeah, I'll just run through them quickly.
Yeah.
Right, FINRA is how we got started and is sort of our bread and butter. Those are licensing exams for wealth management, investment banking, trading, analysis operations, or other licensed roles in the finance industry. And we have the FINRA SIE, the Series 6, 7, 63, 65, and 66 exam courses with industry best pass rates and just, tremendously positive feedback across the board on
Hmm.
our homepage, on reviews on Reddit, etc. People really like what we built on the FINRA. And then our other exams, which also a lot of these are also great businesses for us.
Hmm.
We have the GRE exam prep business, which is for getting into graduate school. The USMLE Step 1, which is to become your first step on being a licensed medical doctor. The ACT, which is college admissions exam. And then the AMC exams, which is for the American Math Olympiad,
Wow.
which is for extremely high performing high school students that want to go to Stanford, MIT, etc. And this is one of the ways that you can stand out from the crowd and do that.
Great. Yeah, that's fantastic to know. Thanks for sharing all of that. So, yeah, so let's get into the business ownership journey. And that's why this podcast exists. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. One of the questions I love to ask business owners is, what is your favorite part about being an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's always something really special about creating something. I mean, that's what's been most special to me, right? Like, I think that at the end of the day, when you're working at a company, you have the advantage of having a lot more resources and
Hmm.
support, and you have the advantage of not necessarily having to do kind of the crummy part of the job, right? Every
Hmm.
vertical, whether you're working in programming or sales or marketing or whatever it is, kind of has some not so fun work that
Hmm.
oftentimes when you're at a large company goes to the entry level people. When you're at a startup, you get to do it.
Yeah,
But the payoff really is that you really are building something not only that you can put your name on, but that is actually having a demonstrable impact on the world,
hmm,
right? It's when we get those feedback messages from customers where they're like, "You guys saved my job," or
yeah.
like, "Thank you so much for building this," that it's really rewarding and that motivates us every day.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I when I get those messages, I'm kind of old school in some ways, but I literally print them out and I'll write on them like why it's special to me so that I when I'm having a hard day, I'll go back and look at that file and that has really over the past 15 years gotten me through some tough times. So yeah, those
Oh,
little
I love
moments.
that.
Yeah, it's really it's just it's just a good resource to have, when you're, because I
Hmm.
mean, let's be honest, some days are very hard as a business owner. Some weeks are very hard, some months, some years even are very hard. So, it's good to hang on to the good times, at least have a memory of them. So, that just provides motivation to keep going. So Tyler, what do you consider to be, I know you've had some ups and downs in business. I know when we first talked,
Hmm.
you spoke about that a little bit. What do you consider to be your biggest win as a business owner, though?
For me, certainly, I think our biggest win is just what we're doing right now with Achievable. It's going extremely well. We were essentially making enough money that we were able to raise a small seed round towards the end of last year.
Hmm.
Or actually, now we're in 2023, so it's midway through last year, and essentially, like we've been really proud of the fact that we've built this whole business up to a point now where we're growing really well. We've got, a handful of employees, and we've got people organically coming to us,
Hmm.
looking to buy our products or do business with us, right? And that it's really when, I mean, we're starting to see it now, particularly in a couple of the verticals that we're in,
Hmm.
where like there's a turning point as a business where you go from who the heck are you? And, why are you bothering me with your
Hmm.
email? To
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, I've heard of you guys and I've heard
Hmm.
great things, right? That is such a magical moment, and it feels like it's never going to happen for the
Hmm.
years or yeah, for the months or years that
Hmm.
you're just grinding away in obscurity, right? But
Hmm.
hitting that inflection point on just even brand awareness feels really good. And then obviously sort of my saying, I don't know if this someone else has said this, but sort of revenue is a trailing indicator of success. So you
Hmm.
have to do all the brand building stuff well, you have to do all the content marketing or whatever sort of other outreach ideas well, and you've got to kind of do the upper parts of the funnel well, and it all will eventually make its way down to the revenue side. And that's when when the revenue is growing really well, that's when the whole thing's working. So it's really rewarding for us.
Hey, this is Julie B, and you're listening to They Don't Teach This in Business School. I'm here today with Tyler York of Achievable. And you just said something really interesting, Tyler, about revenue being basically a lagging indicator, not a leading indicator. And I think that's a
Hmm.
really important point because a lot of business owners, especially when they're first starting out, or even when they're, I would say 5 years in, they judge so much based on their profit and loss statement. And while that's very important, what I think gets lost in translation is what you have to do to actually get there. And
Hmm.
those are kind of the leading indicators that you were talking about from a marketing perspective. And I'm just curious, how do you make sure though, because especially when you're kind of entering a market and with what you do, it's not really it's very service based. It is a product, but
Hmm.
there's a very service based element to it. So there's usually a lot of education that goes along with that. How do you know when something you're doing in marketing is working before it gets to, let's say, the producing revenue? Because there is some time lag in there where you've got to educate, you've got to get awareness. But what
Hmm.
indicators do you look for along the way before revenue to know that you're on the right path?
Yeah, and when I made my comment about revenue being a lagging indicator,
Hmm.
I think it's true at the macro and micro level,
Hmm.
but I think that the time scale is very different for like your whole company versus like a marketing channel,
Yeah.
right? So in a lot of ways, I mean, certainly first and foremost is you should have metrics no matter what you're
Hmm.
doing. And even if those metrics are literally just views,
Hmm.
right? Like the most basic level of engagement with what
Hmm.
you're doing. That's a better start than nothing.
Hmm.
And then really you should be looking to kind of again unlock every step down the funnel as you go. So let's say as an example, you write a blog post and you're like, is this blog post going to make me money?
Hmm.
Well, first you need to get people to look at the blog post at all. Then you
Yeah.
need to have some sort of call to action in that blog post, and you need to move that around to actually get people to click it. And then you need to actually, once people are on that landing page, get them to convert, right? And so you
Hmm.
can kind of do each step in order like that, going from the top of the funnel to the bottom. It's definitely better than going from the bottom to the top because you
Hmm.
just won't have the traffic to test anything.
Yeah.
I think it is also worth noting, and this is like a slight contradiction to what I said
Hmm.
earlier, but generally speaking, what we think about is if it, when you're doing a new business or a startup, you need to be experimenting with marketing things all the time, and your biggest opportunity cost is time, right? If this experiment doesn't work, you could have spent that time on a different one. So
Hmm.
it's important to set boundaries for, how many users or viewers are we going to
Hmm.
get before we say this thing is working or not, or how much time is it going to be, or
Yeah.
how much in an ad campaign, how much spend are we going to spend
Hmm.
before we, essentially make a call and then move on to the
Yeah.
next thing.
It's about constant refinement. And
Hmm.
you, there's an element to marketing. I've done marketing for almost 15 years, well, over 15 years, but have ran a
Hmm.
marketing agency for almost 15 years. And even even today when we do work for clients, that's something I have to, I we know more what's going to work usually than when they're coming to us, and don't have a lot of experience in it. But there, even for us, there's always a learning curve. It's just, to your
Hmm.
point, the boundaries around it, I think, are what's really important. The guardrails that you set up so that you don't just keep dumping money into something that's not going to work. I think that's a really important point to make.
Hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So, Tyler, I asked you a few minutes ago about, your biggest win. So I'm going to ask you the opposite question now. And what are some of the, let's just call it, past business mistakes that you have made that if you had the opportunity to go back and change them, you would go back and change them? Are there
Well,
any?
yeah,
Sometimes
there's
there aren't. You learn from all your mistakes, but I think it's interesting just to talk about mistakes that you've made along the way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of answers to that question, right? But I think that the couple that stick out to me in relation to what we're doing at Achievable, I think the biggest one is we got started and we when we originally started, it was actually all the way back in 2016.
Hmm.
And we evaluated a number of markets, and one of the reasons why we decided to work on the markets that we did is because we identified that there was sort of a gap between what providers were giving in that market as far as test prep materials and what was capable of technology, right? Like
Hmm.
there were a lot of competitors that were frankly either serving up books or serving up what you might as well call a book, but just like
Yeah.
on a website.
Yeah.
And there weren't any interactive experiences. So we saw that as an opportunity. I think the mistake that we've made in those phases was that we, when doing our market research, didn't do enough to identify essentially like where the problem was, like where did the pain sit within the customer. This is
Hmm.
especially important in a B2B business.
Yeah.
And how important or what priority was that pain to the customer?
Hmm.
Um, and so that's something that I would say going forward is one of the biggest things that I'd recommend to entrepreneurs is really you're going to spend 1 to 2 years working on a business, right? Like you're going to
Yeah.
be putting all this effort into this business to make it work. It's really worth your time to spend 2 or 3 months doing customer research, doing user research interviews, put your UXR hat on. Like
Hmm.
there's there's a lot, and frankly, you'll learn probably a lot more about what you need to build during that time
Hmm.
than if you just kind of went and built it and then take it to market and say, okay, like let's tweak it based on what we found. You're just everything's going to be a lot more efficient if you start with the research and you really fully flesh out the problem and the pain for the customer and how much they're frankly willing to pay for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's such critical, like you said. I mean, you've said you spend 1 to 2 years. I mean, there are people who spend 30 years running a business, so
Right,
spending, you know, two, three, four, even, I mean, I've talked to businesses who've spent 18 months researching something before they actually launched because it was such a high level technology that they needed to spend that much time. But
right.
yeah, that is so important to do. There's no, yeah, it's almost priceless.
Yeah. Yeah, I said 1 to 2 years just because that's kind of if you're starting a startup, that's
Oh
like the
yeah.
bare minimum
Oh yeah.
for
Yeah.
you to really know whether it's going to work or not.
For sure. Sometimes you don't even know it then, but you just keep going, keep trying. I think I think part of what makes a business the continuity of it is just the sheer willpower and perseverance of the business owners who are running it, because
Hmm.
I think the last time I looked at the stat, it was like 50% of businesses don't make it past the first year. And I would almost guarantee you that the 50% who do, a lot of them, it's just on sheer willpower. It's just on, they've had a little success here and there, enough to keep them going, but they're just going to keep going. And I think
Right.
that cannot be overstated. Um, so Tyler, one other question I like to ask, kind of down the same rabbit hole, is about burnout. And I'm curious if you've ever
Mhm.
experienced burnout, and if you have any stories about it.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like with a lot of mental health things, it's like kind
Yeah.
of hard to tell where just having a bad day begins and where burnout begins, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like I've definitely had my share of burnout style days. I think that the
Mm-hmm.
biggest thing is just to essentially give yourself space in those moments
Mm-hmm.
and to give yourself, to give yourself the resources you need to, for lack of a better word, feel better, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and if you're, I mean, I know that this maybe just kind of sounds silly, but like, if I'm having a particularly hard day,
Mm-hmm.
there's like a pint of ice cream that I have in the freezer that I really like, and I'll have like a bite or two of it. It's like really small, right? But
Yeah.
it's those kind of things, or it's like if you are, you know, deep in the grind, which as a business owner, startup person, you will be, and
Mm-hmm.
you have a day where you're just not feeling it, or a day where you're just like it's
Mm-hmm.
you're kind of just like feeling that stress
Yeah.
like compressing your head almost.
Mm-hmm.
Um, take a break, go for a walk. Getting some movement in is particularly good, but
Yeah.
even if you're just taking a break to do something you like to do, like watch TV or whatever, um, that the business is going to be there tomorrow. And a lot of times these feelings of burnout, and this is my personal experience, are, things that when you wake up the next morning, you're not necessarily going to start right back in the middle of the burnout again, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
when you get a reset, you can kind of reset. So it's like,
Yeah.
it's nice sometimes to kind of say, okay, today, maybe just I'm going to have an easy day because I need a little bit of an easy day today, and take care of yourself so that you can
Yeah.
come back strong the next day.
Well, and what you're talking about is what I hear is incremental resets and building
Hmm.
breaks into, or giving yourself permission to take a break when you're not feeling it. Because we certainly, you know, we all have those days as business owners where we wake up and we are just like, oh man, today is not the day for me to write uh, you know, website copy for this new thing that we're launching. It's the day for me
Right.
to maybe watch some TV, maybe check some emails, and I think that's really important to know about yourself, because that really, I think that's part of preventing burnout, is
Hmm.
knowing when, and then also giving yourself permission to take those breaks and not feeling guilty about it. That's the other part of it, is I think business
Right.
owners can feel really guilty when they do have an off day and just let themselves do whatever they want to. You got to let that guilt go.
Yeah, that's probably the hardest part. It took me a few years to finally learn
Yeah,
that.
I hear you. I hear you. So talk to me a little bit about, one thing, and I like to actually ask people who are co-founders or have business partners this question, because I think it's really interesting when they answer it. But
Hmm.
many business owners say it's lonely at the top. Have you experienced that, even though you have a co-founder? And if you
Hmm.
have, can you talk a little bit about that?
I mean, I think that sort of me and my co-founder, we met in college, and we've been friends kind of this whole time. So
Mm-hmm.
it luckily for me, it hasn't been as lonely as I'm sure it could be for a solo entrepreneur. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I think that the hardest part, regardless of whether you have co-founders or not, is
Mm-hmm.
always like keeping that motivation in yourself on the
Mm-hmm.
hard days, right?
Yeah.
Or on the days where maybe something doesn't work out the way that you wanted it to.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of I guess maybe your sort of second part of your question was kind of
Hmm.
like advice around that.
Hmm.
I mean, I think that essentially it is the blessing and the curse of being a business owner is
Yeah.
sort of the fact that you don't necessarily have other people that you can ask about like, what do I do with like this employee, or what do I
Hmm.
do about like this business deal? And so whenever there are situations like that, I mean, the most important thing is to have people that you can ask in your network,
Yeah.
right? There are also some groups that a lot of them are industry specific, so I think
Hmm.
you should go look them up for yourself. But there are
Hmm.
groups of founders or groups or agencies in different industries, right? Whether they're nonprofit or not, that are like-minded people, and just finding those kind of support groups can
Hmm.
be really powerful. And it oftentimes it can be as simple as just being like, oh, it's not just me. Like
Hmm.
sales are down for lots of people this month
Yeah.
in this industry or whatever it is, right? And also just having like any kind of sounding board. I mean, I'm lucky that my parents both are pretty accomplished professionals, and so I can ask them about things, and I have a
Hmm.
number of other friends from my time in school and things like that. So just think about your support network. I know that you don't always necessarily have people that are in the same boat, but if you don't have that, then try to create that group of friends
Yeah.
with people that have that same sort of entrepreneur lifestyle. And you can do it online.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit easier
Absolutely.
now.
Absolutely. So, Tyler, how do you define success?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for me, this is kind of like a hokey circular answer, but it's success is whatever you define it as, right? And I
Hmm.
think when I say that, what I mean to say is when I was younger, I felt like success basically was like starting a company that IPO'd or sold for $1 billion. And that was the only thing that would make me successful, and everything else didn't really count.
Hmm.
What I've found is that really success is personal. It's up to whatever is what you want, right? So if you're starting a business and your goal is basically to get it to where it can support you, and you hit that point, like then that's success for you, right? You don't have to necessarily hold yourself to some standard that is, basically for lack of a better word, pushed by the media because it's useful
Hmm.
for sort of
Yeah.
capitalism at large. I think that there's, quite a lot of people that would think success is like, having a ranch or a homestead somewhere and like living
Hmm.
sustainably by themselves, right? Is that
Hmm.
me? Like, no. But the point is that you can define that for yourself, and then really like don't let other people redefine it for you.
Yeah, I think one theme that kind of runs throughout, and I've actually given that same exact answer on a podcast that I was on, that success for me is being able to define what success means. And then I went into like say, this is what it looks like for me. But one thing that I have learned over the past couple of years is that success and goals are two different things. Goals are
Right.
things that you mark off your list. Success is a place where you want to hang out for a while. And being a high achiever, I had gotten into the trap of I would achieve a goal and not feel success because it was always what's next? What's the next
Mhm.
milestone? That's just how some of us are wired. And I think that separating those two out is a really important
Right.
thing for people to do. There's nothing wrong with having goal. I mean, you need to have goals as a business owner for your business, for yourself, for all of that. But also defining success outside of that, I think is really important.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the biggest thing too,
Yeah.
as you're going along, you've got to celebrate the win that you have, right? If you're a startup that has never had a paying customer and you get your first customer
Yeah.
and it's $50 a month, like that's still a success,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely.
Like I think that it's really easy to just say, well, we're not doing, $1 million ARR, so we're still losers. It's like, no, I mean, you got to celebrate every bit along the way, or else, like you said, you're going to hit burnout and
Mhm.
be pretty unhappy.
That that is right. So Tyler, as we're coming to the end of this conversation, I've really enjoyed it. I always ask my guests this last question. if you were asked to teach a class to future entrepreneurs about being a business owner, what is the main nugget of information you would want them to take away from your class?
Yeah, well, I'm gonna steal a little bit from my experience at Carnegie Mellon because I absolutely love this, and if it is a big part of the reason why I'm an entrepreneur, and also I think that if I were ever to teach entrepreneurship, I would do exactly this, which is I had a professor at the time, it was what, 2000, probably, yeah, 2009 or 2010,
Mm-hmm.
Professor Cuthbertson, I believe. And
Okay.
he had an entrepreneurship class for juniors and seniors
Mm.
that he gave everybody $1,500. And he said, your assignment is to go turn this $1,500 into as much money as possible by the end of the semester.
Mm-hmm.
And there were thresholds for what would give you an A, what would give you a B, what would give you a C. And so you had to put money basically into the pot to get the A, B, or C for your group.
Mm-hmm.
But then the person who put the or the team that put the most money into the pot would win the whole pot. So there's like a fun little like gamification of
Yeah.
it. And in co the winning team would sometimes come away with as much as like $20,000, which in college is a king's ransom.
Yeah, for
And so
sure.
it was just like such a cool class because essentially you and a small team got together and you were just trying to brainstorm like how can I make money, right? And
Mm-hmm.
one of my friends actually, we didn't win it. Like we did things like try to sell hot chocolate during the winter. We ran a couple prints of like t-shirts and things like that, and
Mm-hmm.
for sports games. I had a friend who actually he figured out like a major political rally that was going on in Washington, D.C., and he
Mm-hmm.
organized a bunch of buses down there. And they sold people bus tickets
Wow.
before they even had the buses booked, and then they booked the buses with the money from the tickets.
Mm-hmm.
And so he won that year, right? And I think it's just like that's what entrepreneurship really is it's really kind of this like scrappy creativity.
Mm-hmm.
And if I were teaching it in college, I would really try to mirror a lot of those same things. I think that, and to kind of go back to what your question really
Mm-hmm.
is, right, which is like, what's kind of the lesson?
Yeah.
I think that the lesson there is really that there's a lot more ways to make money than you think, or that there's kind of like getting the muscle of like we're going to try something out. Let's see how much money we make from it. Does it work or not? Okay, let's try another thing.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a really powerful muscle, right? Like I don't know if you've heard this story, but there's this sort of semi-famous story of that Airbnb was running out of money. So they sold like McCain and Obama themed cereal at one of the conventions in order to like raise enough money to keep working on Airbnb.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me, more than anything, is just like such a it shows essentially that that scrappy creativity
Yeah.
is irrelevant no matter who you are, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to feel a sense of pride or like this is beneath me or anything like that. It's about kind of building that muscle of trying things and building little businesses.
That's a great, yeah, that scrappy creativity, that perseverance, that like we're going to figure this out and we're going to figure out how to keep going while we're figuring out how to actually make it work. I think there's an element in there as well because sometimes you have to do that as a business owner, and that's where having that muscle, like you said, is so important.
Yeah.
So Tyler, listen, I've really enjoyed this conversation today, and I know other business owners are going to really get some great tips out of this. I just want to thank you again for being on the show today.
Yeah, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
And that is it for this episode, but stay tuned because I'll be back more with lessons learned on the business owner journey. I'm Julie B, and they don't teach this in business school.